In 1959, Captain İlhan Darupınar noticed this boat-shaped object while inspecting Turkish reconnaissance photographs. 11 years earlier, locals noticed the object after the surrounding mud flow subsided in the aftermath of 3 earthquakes. Lodged at the constriction in a major mud flow at over 6,000 feet in the mountains of the region of ancient Urartu, translated Ararat, 2 kilometers from Iran and 17 kilometers from Agrodagra, lies what today is known as the Darupınar boat-shaped object. Is the Darupınar Formation a common occurrence in the region, as some claim? This aerial photograph shows the unique boat shape of the Darupınar site. Contrary to the claims of several detractors, there are no other formations of this shape in the vicinity. Often, oblique pictures of unidentified lava structures are said to be boat-shaped, but inspection from above would show that these are circular or oval features. As can be seen in this picture, a circle when viewed from the side will appear oval or boat-shaped. Another fallacious argument proffered by those who are not grounded in the understanding of fluid dynamics and flow effects is the incorrect belief that flow diverted around an obstruction would separate and rejoin downstream, thereby forming a boat-shaped shadow immediately downstream from the obstruction. All one needs to do is observe the wake formed by a rock in the flow of a stream to see that the classic Kelvin wake spreads at a 38.8-degree angle, never to return to a point. Compounding the error of those making these claims is the fact that had they visited the Darupınar site and studied its morphology, they would observe that there is no obstruction at either end of the boat-shaped formation that would account for a separation of the flow in the first place. Is the Darupınar Formation a common occurrence in the region, as some claim? In a photograph entitled "Other Canoe/Boat Shapes Around Little Ararat Across Valley," a photo courtesy of Charles Willis has been marked up to show just a few of the many arc formations found in the lava near Küçük Arga. Is there realistically any comparison between the rock shadows and the snow in this picture and the distinct physical shape of the Darupınar site when viewed looking down from above? Even drawing boat-shaped figures around these shadows doesn't make them convincing. Let's consider the same photograph to see how many rectangular Hagopian arcs can be found using the same faulty analysis. Could the Darupınar boat-shaped object be evidence for the Ark of Noah? The location is right. At 515 feet long, the boat-shaped object is exactly 300 Egyptian cubits, that's 20.6-inch cubits, and based on Babylonian deck area of 1 iku, it has an average 50-cubit width. The newer Hebrew cubit of 18 inches is often quoted by people describing the ark and what a cubit was. However, there's an older cubit that's 20.6 inches, which was used in the pyramids, and the book of Genesis was written by Moses. Now, Moses was raised in the court of the Pharaoh. It makes sense that Moses would use units that were familiar to him and the ones with which he was taught, the 20.6-inch Egyptian cubit, not a later Hebrew cubit of 18 inches. Around the Darupınar site are various locations that bear names associated with the flood story. For example, the peak to the south is called Ziyaret Dag, which means to make a voluntary pilgrimage. One of 3 mountains in Turkey that's claimed to be named Judy, as in the Quran's version of the flood story, is the peak just to the right of Ziret Dag. The entire ridge, which comprises what the Babylonians call the Wall of Heaven, is named Mashar. The village of Uzingli was also formerly known by this name, and it means Judgment Day. The village to the west is Nasar, which means to make a sacrifice. And most interestingly, the village to the east is Karga Kanmaz, which means Karga, crow, Khan, land or a light, Maz, won't. The crow won't land. Karga Kanmaz. The village to the southeast bears the name Yityatagi, which means hero's anchorage. So everything around the Darupanar boat-shaped object seems to have some name associated with the flood story. We don't find that to be true around Mount Ararat. So the dimensions are right, and it's in the shape of a boat. It turns out that ground penetration radar measurements also showed that there's an internal structure. David Foshold's measurement report to the Turkish authorities in June 1985 showed the results of these ground penetration radar measurements. Some of the measurements were done with a molecular frequency generator and are suspect. However, the measurements done with the ground penetration radar have been corroborated by others and show internal bulkhead areas that go laterally across the formation. This doesn't seem to be a natural formation based on those lines. Dave Foshold suggested that the Ark was actually something called a Magor, which was a reed ship akin to what Thor Heyerdahl used. Whether it was made of reeds, made of wood, no one knows. Reeds would have long since rotted away, as would wood at this particular altitude. The Akkadians called the boat Elipu Urbati, and some of the measurements that were done by Fossil indicated that there might be a moon pool in the center from which sea anchors might be deployed to steer the ship in the surging waves to keep the end of the ship into the wind and the waves rather than turning it amidship and perhaps capsizing the boat. The fact that large drogue stones have been found upstream from the Darupanar site adds credence to this thought. The purpose of drogue stones is to create drag in the water. It keeps the hydrodynamic end of the vessel into the flow. Although the Christian Bible neither confirms nor denies the existence of drogue stones or sea anchors, ancient accounts refer to the Ark as having drogue stones and anchor lines, which would have been a necessity to survive the high winds and seas. Today, boats use sea anchors that look more like underwater parachutes than stones, but many ancient drogue stones have been found in the Nile and elsewhere in the Mediterranean area. These drogue stones are heavy and flat with a hole for connecting a line at one end. According to the U.S. Coast Guard Research and Development Center report number CGD 2087, entitled Investigation of the Use of Drogues to Improve the Safety of Sailing Yachts, a series of small drag-producing chutes along a line from the bow is the most reliable sea anchor configuration. Note that the end of the line must be weighted to keep it from rising into the surface mixing layer. So perhaps the Ark of Noah used drogue stones in this fashion. But the point is that for stability, drogue stones would have been an important feature, and we find drogue stones in the area. 20 of these drogue stones have been identified in the region thus far. What's interesting is that some of them have a curved hole to accept an anchor line without chafing that line. Were the Ark to have employed an all but necessary drogue system, it might have employed similar cloth chutes, but based on the stated dimensions of the Ark, To be effective, there would have to have been a large number of large cross-section chutes. In order to keep such high-lift lines from surfacing under load, a massive weight would be necessary at the end of the line, a weight on the order of those found at Artsap. Even if chutes were not employed, a massive weight on the end of the line would still provide a degree of braking force. 20 of these stones have been identified in the region thus far. Some are being used as grave markers in Artsap, while others are scattered about the vicinity. Some of these stones have carvings on them. It's believed that many of these are later Armenian Christian carvings. However, there are some that might depict the ark itself, showing different deck levels, such as this ziggurat-shaped carving found on one of the stones. The characteristic of these stones is that they all have a hole in one end. Should we expect to find drogue stones associated with the Ark of Noah? Genesis 8:4 states, "And in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark rested upon the mountains of Ararat. And the water decreased steadily until the 10th month. And in the 10th month, on the 1st day of the month, the tops of the mountains became visible." So how could the ark come to rest on the mountains of Ararat, or Urartu, in the 7th month, and the tops of the mountains not be visible for another 3 months? If you were looking for the ark and you're looking for it on top of Mount Ararat, that doesn't make any sense. Clearly, to land on the top of Mount Ararat, the top of Mount Ararat would have had to be visible. And if it's at rest at the top of a volcano, shouldn't it be easy to find there? If it's at rest on the side of this volcano, the part of the volcano above this spot would have to have been visible. And we don't even know that the Ararat volcano was in existence at the time of the flood. However, if the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat, or the submarine mountains of Ararat, clearly there was topology below the surface of the water, and if there were drogue stones hanging down on long lines, the ark could have come to rest in the mountains of Ararat, the submarine mountains of Ararat, and that could have happened before any land was visible. In fact, 12 of the drogue stones are found near the old town of Kazan, which is a topological high point in the area where these stones would have likely become snagged beneath the surface. One thing that's interesting is that the modern town of Kazan used to be called Arzap. In Turkish, Artsap means to capture the earth. In Semitic, it's Eretsab, which also means to cling to the earth. Artsab, Eretsab, very similar sounding names with similar meanings. In the 7th month, is this where the drogue stones hanging below the ark first contacted the topological high point, thereby bringing the ark to rest in the submarine mountains of Ararat? Let's consider the drogue stones of Artsap. Not only do drogue stones make sense in light of the references found in chapter 8 of Genesis, but we also find that specific references are made to anchor lines and stones in other holy books and secular literature. The Quran in Surah Hud, the chapter of Hud, states that in the name of Allah it will cast anchor. Further, in the Babylonian Epic of Gilgamesh, Tablet 10, Column 2, Gilgamesh has the following exchange with Ur-Shanabi, the boatman who will take Gilgamesh to cross the waters to meet Utnapishtim, who's the Babylonian Noah. Line 37 says, "Your own hands, Gilgamesh, have hindered the crossing." Line 40, "The stone things are broken." Line 41, And the stone things he loaded in the boat. Line 42. The stone things, without which there is no crossing death's waters. So eventually the ark stopped drifting because the drogue stones hanging below snagged the submarine mountains of the region of Urartu in the 7th month on the 17th day of the month. Over the next 3 months, the water decreased steadily until the 10th month the tops of the mountains became visible. However, after coming to rest on the submarine mountains of the region of Urartu, Noah waited 40 days and then, according to Genesis chapter 8, he released reconnaissance birds, the first of which were unable to immediately detect any dry land, much less the side of the Ararat volcano. Eventually, a released bird returned with evidence of dry land. At this point, Noah could have cut the drogue stone anchor lines that were holding the ark fast on the submarine mountains near the Arzap underwater plateau. The ark could then drift and become beached at the base of the wall of heaven, where upon God's command, he and his household, as well as his living cargo, disembarked onto dry land. In 1959, Turkish captain İlhan Durupanar recognized an unusual boat-shaped object in aerial reconnaissance photographs taken from about 20,000 feet along the Turkish border with Iran. This boat-shaped object, which bears Durupanar's name, is lodged at the point of constriction in a confluence of 3 mudflows near the town of Uzengli. These mudflows move somewhat through the process of erosion, but much more significantly during periods of liquefaction, which happen during the frequent seismic activity that occurs along the eastern Anatolian fault running through the valley between Mount Ararat and the towns of Doğu and Kazan. Moses of Koronensis refers to a town near Naxwan, or Noah's Zion, as the place of dispersion from which Noah's progeny moved out into the world. This town was called Seron. Tsar means narrow or tight, and could refer to this constriction in the mudflows where the Durupanar boat-shaped object lies. The present-day town of Uzengli is adjacent to this constriction and could be built on the ruins of Seron. Of interest is the imprint just beneath the wall of heaven at the top of the eastern mudflow, which matches the Durupanar site in shape and size. This appears in the original Durupanar aerial reconnaissance photos, but today is obliterated by a Turkish military patrol road. Very ancient foundations and an ossuarial burial jar have been found around this place of first descent at the top of the eastern mudflow. The imprint at the top of the eastern mudflow could indicate the location of the original landing point of the ark, which, over time, slid down the slope with the mudflow from its 7,400-foot altitude to the present location of the Durupanar site at around 6,200 feet. The imprint at the top was visible in the 1959 Durupanar reconnaissance photo and was noticed by ark researcher Dave Deal in 1997. If this is indeed what happened, we have no idea how long the boat remained intact to compress the soil beneath until it was totally scavenged or rotted. The journey down the mudflow could have been gradual or quite rapid if extensive liquefaction of the soil took place during some 6,000 years of earthquakes. Since the Durupanar site is comprised mostly of indigenous materials, the formation is likely a compression footprint of the hull and not a petrified hull. The ground penetration radar and resistivity observations of regular patterns of subsurface materials with contrasting dielectric constant and therefore contrasting reflectivity and conductivity, would result from both points of extreme soil compression over long periods of time, as well as decomposed material infusing into the soil. In this region, at these altitudes, organic materials would thoroughly decompose over the centuries. The wall of heaven, to which I've made reference on numerous occasions, is actually a name coined by the Babylonians in the Epic of Gilgamesh and referenced as an escarpment by both Moses of Coronensis and Flavius Josephus. The Epic of Gilgamesh states that Gilgamesh came to Mashu, the great mountains of which he had heard many things, which guard the rising of the sun. Its twin peaks are as high as the wall of heaven. Upon inspection, I was able to take morning and evening photographs, which clearly show that the sun rises over this dual-peaked escarpment, which extends up to a height of 7,800 feet. The wall of heaven indeed guards the rising of the sun, as it is in shadows as the sun rises in the east and is brightly illuminated as the sun sets in the west. As we've noted in earlier photographs, the Darupanar boat-shaped object is shaped like a boat. Along the side are crenellations with vertical fissures in between. These fissures are thin saw cuts or stress fractures at the base of each indentation. The Christian Bible states that the ark was made of KPR, rendered as kafar or gopher. This word is used only once in the Bible, and it does not necessarily refer to wood, but defines a kind of stalk, reeds, shaft, or framework of elongated material. If these sides were KPR, then what we see is either the remains of an aggregate overlayment or replacement material. However, I believe it's more likely that the Darupanar site is the compression footprint of the ark. And over the many millennia, the weight of the ark, that which was not scavenged for building materials or taken off as talismans, would have compressed the soil beneath to make places that had different dielectric properties such that they would show up with ground penetration radar and would also have greater compression than surrounding materials such that they weather better and survive where other materials wash away. At this particular altitude, wood would have rotted long ago, and a valuable commodity like wood after a flood would be something that Noah and his descendants would have needed to be able to build new settlements, to provide wood for fires, and there's no indication or directive in the Bible telling Noah that he was to preserve the ark for future generations to see. The ark was built to take them through the flood and no more, and therefore it would have been open for their free use in any other ways that they saw fit. So should we really expect to find the ark existing today? Not necessarily. However, finding evidence, such as a compression footprint of where the ark lay for so many hundreds of years, that is entirely feasible. Since 1995, the vertical fissures have opened and closed at various times as observed every few years since. This photograph shows the discontinuous vertical fissures on the east side of the formation, which were observed in May 2007. In 1960, René Noorbergen, a journalist, and George Vandeman, an evangelist, put together a team to visit this site in an effort to find wood. They used dynamite to blast a hole in the side of the site, and finding no gopher wood, they left dejected. If in fact this is a compression footprint of the ark, one would not expect to be finding timbers. However, many other things are found in and around the site. There is hard material with a varnish on it that some have probably mistaken as the KPR or gopher wood in fossilized form. There are marine fossils that are found in and around the site, as well as other fossilized animal parts. The fossils include shells, corals, and various other calcified objects. Many of these things indicate that the area was indeed underwater. For as much attention as Mount Ararat gets as being the home of Noah's Ark, the Turkish government has set up signs saying Naoh Gemisi, the boat of Noah, is in the opposite direction at the Darupanar site near the village of Uzingli. Turkish guides are more than happy to take explorers up the side of Mount Ararat in search of ark shadows. But the official government position is that the Darupanar site is the one that has the most to do with the Ark of Noah.